Thank you. Thank you for the
Thank you so much, Shivali. And again, while we wait for David to connect, maybe I would like to just recall for colleagues, some of you may remember, but for some of you, maybe you weren't there at the time of the National Task Force on Human Rights Leadership, that David really supported that conversation in Scotland throughout 3 sets of workshops we held with duty bearers and some of civil society organizations in the environment and human rights. And he has been all along since then very much in touch and hoping to hear news about this process. As you've heard in the video, the vast majorities of countries in the world already recognize the human right to a healthy environment in their constitutions. So in a way, Scotland is catching up. But what's really important here is that because of the new developments at the international level, actually Scotland has an opportunity to leapfrog and become a leader globally in how they recognize a human right to a healthy environment and enhance protection for all other human rights, including, I think, the human rights of children, which already have received particular attention in Scotland. And just last week, the UN finally released new guidance on the protection of children's rights in the context of a healthy environment, with a particular focus on climate change. So it is important to keep in mind how the international legal framework has become so much clearer, dramatically clearer on the interlinkages between a healthy environment and all our human rights in the last year. There's been a lot of pushback for many years, but we've really seen a revolution in the last few years. And a lot of learning has finally kind of clicked and been captured, both at the scientific level and in legal terms. And I think Scotland is in an incredible position to just treasure all of that learning, all of that guidance that has just been captured at the international level, but in many ways is not new. It's really coming from decades of engagement and understanding, and also that specific work that has been done also in Scotland at the local level to understand how individuals and groups and family are directly affected in many aspects of their human well-being, which are protected as human rights by a declining environment. I would also like to underscore what's been really incredible for us in working with David in the process of the dialogue in Scotland on the human right to a healthy environment, has been building on his work on that substantive definition of the right, which we have seen featuring prominently in the animation. And I think what has seemed to be a really, again, game-changing aspect in embracing that international definition of the substantive content of the human right to a healthy environment is that clear sense of how, through the recognition, we can think in a much more integrated way around the challenges and the opportunities of better protecting the environment for the protection of human rights, and particularly the rights of the most vulnerable. And I think one of the areas where I became more and more hopeful in the earlier work of the National Task Force was really our engagement with Health Scotland, and that understanding of health inequities and how those are overlap with some of inequities in terms of being exposed to environmental damage. But equally, the incredible opportunity to really understand in what ways protecting the environment help us to achieve multiple public goals in Scotland, and in fact, multiple sustainable development goals in Scotland related to equity, related to health, to gender, to children and education, and many other aspects. So I'm hoping that the conversation already this morning has been helpful, both to see the human right to a healthy environment as a new benchmark for all public authorities, but also all civil society, private sector, researchers and others to really work towards enhancing the protection of the environment through that deeper understanding of its importance for multiple dimensions on human well-being and human flourishing, but equally not a daunting sense, a sense of hope and a sense of being more supportive in doing that work. The recognition of the human right to a healthy environment in the Scottish context can allow us to identify areas where different public authorities could work better together, where different areas of civil society that maybe have not worked together yet can come together and find actually a shared agenda and really bring in that new allies to the protection of the environment and human well-being and flourishing in Scotland. So I think that there's an incredible opportunity for enhancing our capacities for joined-up thinking, system thinking, for innovation, which Scotland is already worldwide famous for, and for that, delivery on multiple sustainable development goals, taking into account the needs of the most vulnerable and the timeframes that matter for the most vulnerable. And I think that engagement with children's rights to a healthy environment really helps to think more carefully about the decisions that we have when we make laws, when we plan use of public budget, when we plan, take planning decisions in Scotland, and having that understanding in mind can really help us to take more long-lasting, sustainable, and beneficial decisions moving forward. I see that David has joined us, so we'll see if he can hear us and we can hear him.
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you beautifully, Elisa. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you so much, David. I know it's very early where you are, and plus waking up to internet issues is never a great feeling. So I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. That's the way it goes sometimes.
Thank you. So just to catch you up, I was just recalling to colleagues in the room about your long engagement with the Scottish process on the recognition of the human right to a healthy environment, all the work that has happened internationally that really can allow Scotland not only to catch up with the majority of countries in the world in their recognition, but ideally being a leader, really treasuring all those latest understandings of the importance of the human right to a healthy environment. And the importance also of your own work in clarifying the substantive content of that right. So maybe it'd be great to hear from you where you think the opportunities for Scotland are to be a leader in this area and how important that is.
Super. Thank you very much. And apologies, everyone, for the internet difficulties I was having this morning on the west coast of Canada. I'm delighted to be here. I actually was, just before the internet went out this morning, I was trying to find on a map of Scotland the town where my grandparents came from. My grandparents emigrated from Biggar in Lanarkshire in 1908. So I'll have to go back and do that afterwards because I haven't had a chance. But that's one reason why I'm delighted to be part of this Scottish process and have been participating, as Elisa mentioned, for several years. Of course, there has been a lot of great excitement over the last 2 years because the United Nations has finally recognized the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, first at the Human Rights Council in 2021, then at the General Assembly in 2022. But let's be perfectly clear, this is not a new human right. This is a human right that has been around for decades, dating back to the early 1970s when several American states put it in their state constitutions. Slovenia at the time in the early 1970s was part of the state of Yugoslavia, but in Slovenia's constitution they included the right in 1974. Portugal put the right in its constitution in 1976, Spain in 1978, Peru in 1981. And of course, that has snowballed over the ensuing decade. So this year, Canada became the 160th country to recognize in law the right to a healthy environment. So we literally have decades of experience with this right in countries in every region of the world. And we have had academics look at the impact it's had on environmental legislation, on public participation in environmental decision making, and most importantly, in terms of impact on the actual quality of the environment. So for example, we know that states that recognize the right to a healthy environment in their constitutions reduce air pollution more quickly, reduce greenhouse gas emissions more quickly, provide safe drinking water to a higher proportion of their populations, have smaller ecological footprints, etc. So there's a very powerful case for this. And then we can also talk about it not in just those kind of broad sweeping terms, but also in terms of the impact on individuals' lives and communities' lives. For example, in Kenya, the right to a healthy environment was a critical piece of a public effort to prevent the construction of a proposed coal-fired power plant several years ago, which would have been the first coal-fired power plant in East Africa. And obviously the last thing the world needs is more coal plants. And I know that Scotland has been a leader in that regard in closing down coal-fired power plants. The right to a healthy environment has also been critical in the beginnings of efforts to clean up some of the most contaminated and polluted places on Earth. So for example, in the most contaminated watershed in South America, which is the Matanza-Riachuelo River in Buenos Aires that runs through Buenos Aires, a group of citizens used their right to compel all three levels of government, the national government, the provincial government, and the municipal government, as well as more than 40 of the largest polluting businesses in that watershed, to clean it up, to clean up the mess. And that was it's a long and ongoing process. Obviously, you can't wave a magic wand and clean up a watershed overnight. But those governments collectively have now invested billions of dollars in building safe drinking water infrastructure, wastewater treatment infrastructure, cleaning up the river itself, improving access to healthcare and in those communities. And they have enjoyed a real massive increase in their quality of life directly related to their use of the right to a healthy environment. A similar process is now taking place in Chile in a community called Quintero Puchuncaví. Similar processes are taking place in Indonesia, in Jakarta, in South Africa, in Mpumalanga. So we see the power that the right to a healthy environment has to improve people's lives on the ground, which is really the reason why I and others are so excited about the prospect of the right to a healthy environment in the context of a global environmental crisis, where we know that we're facing a climate emergency, the collapse of biodiversity, and pervasive toxic pollution that's killing literally millions of people every year, including thousands of people in Scotland, I might add, more than 2,000 premature deaths a year from air pollution in Scotland. So at this point in history, Scotland has an opportunity not to become one of the first countries to recognize the right, but to become one of the first countries to recognize it in a comprehensive fashion through its human rights legislation, by really building on the experience of 160 other countries around the world to say, look, we now know what the content of that right has evolved to become. Let's make sure that we put that clearly into our legislation. So that has two major components. One is what I call the substantive side. The other is the procedural side. On the substantive side, it's crystal clear now that the right to a healthy environment includes clean air, safe and sufficient water, healthy and sustainably produced food, non-toxic environments where people can live, work, learn, and play, healthy ecosystems and biodiversity, and a safe climate. And those substantive elements have been recognized in legislation by courts all around the world. The other part of it, as I mentioned, is the procedural side. And this is also critically important because these are the tools that enable citizens to realize the substantive elements of the right to a healthy environment. So people need access to environmental information. People need to be able to participate in an equitable and inclusive fashion in environmental decision making. And finally, people need to have access to justice with effective remedies that is affordable, accessible, and timely. And if we put those two pieces of the puzzle together, the substantive elements and the procedural elements in the proposed Scottish legislation, then Scotland does indeed have the opportunity to be a world leader in the comprehensive recognition of the right to a healthy environment. Maybe I'll stop there for the moment, Elisa.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. And I see there's applause in the room.
Oh, hello from Canada.
And I wonder, Shivali, if there are questions in the room, maybe that would be a good time to start receiving those. I'll only be able to stay for another 4 minutes, but if it's possible to moderate from your end, I'm sure colleagues may have specific questions that they'd like to pick David's brain on.
Absolutely, Elisa. So I think we'll start with one question from Juliet Harris on the general comment 26 on the children's right to a healthy environment. And then Elisa will say goodbye to you. And we've got a few more questions, David, that perhaps you could take from the audience as well, and finish in about 10 minutes time for you, David, if that's okay?
Sure, that's fine.
Fantastic. So Juliet, there's a roving mic somewhere, if we could take it to you.
Thank you. In Scotland, we've been absolutely delighted to see the new UN General Comment on children's rights and the environment, and it's so timely when we're consulting on the Human Rights Bill in Scotland. And I know many children and young people across Scotland were actually involved in informing and developing the General Comment. One of the bits, paragraph 64, because I'm a geek, it really talks about the right to healthy and sustainable food being a really important part of the right to a healthy environment. And it's something that we're consulting on in Scotland and we're very supportive of. And I wondered if you might be able to elaborate a bit about why healthy and sustainable food is such an important part of the right to a healthy environment.
Elisa, do you want to answer that, or should I answer that?
I think they might be more interested in hearing what you have to say on that. I can compliment.
Okay, I'm not sure that's the case. Yes, healthy and sustainably produced food is a critical part of the right to a healthy environment. And obviously there are connections between the right to a healthy environment, the right to food, the right to water, the right to sanitation, etc. But the right to a healthy environment really is critical in ensuring that food is sustainably produced. And we know that the current industrial agriculture system globally is one of the largest contributors to the climate crisis, one of the largest users of water, one of the largest contributors to the chemical contamination of the planet. And so the agriculture sector has these huge global adverse environmental impacts, and we really need transformative changes in agriculture, the way we produce our food, and also, frankly, the food that we eat, in terms of healthy diets, healthy for us, healthier diets, healthier for humans, and healthier for ecosystems, which, that's kind of bland language, but really I'm talking about a predominantly plant-based diet, which it isn't suitable for everyone in every culture, but as a species, as a whole, as humanity, we need to shift away from our consumption of industrially produced meat. And so we have lots of examples of where courts have said that this is really critical. For example, courts that have said that the use of highly hazardous pesticides is not consistent with people's right to a healthy environment. A court in Mexico, for example, that said a proposed industrial hog farm was inconsistent with the right to a healthy environment in Mexico. So it's really a critical piece of the puzzle. And I'll turn the microphone over to Elisa for some complimentary comments.
Thank you, David. I think Elisa's had to now leave us, so I'll go on to our second question, if that's okay. And that's from Richard Graham. Richard, do you want to?
Hello, Professor Boyd. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear, Richard.
Nice to see you. My question is a very broad question. My question is, do you think capitalism can save the planet?
Well, it probably doesn't come as a huge surprise to you, Richard, that I'm not a huge fan of capitalism. I think that the current economic system, the way that capitalism is functioning in most parts of the planet, is exploiting humans and exploiting nature. So I do believe we need transformative changes in our economic system. I think there are certainly more ecologically friendly versions of capitalism. The capitalism that's practiced by the Scandinavian nations is better than the predatory capitalism that's practiced by America and other countries. But we do need transformative changes. We need governments to take a much firmer role in regulating the activities of corporations, which is going to require changes to corporate law, changes to international trade law. And you'll be pleased to learn that this is actually the subject of a report I'm working on right now on the role of businesses in relation to people's right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. A report that I'll be presenting to the Human Rights Council in Geneva in the coming March.
Thank you, David. I think Luke Padfield. Luke, can someone give the mic to Luke?
Thank you. Hello, David. My question is about the wording of the right to a healthy environment in different places, and wondered about the idea of a right to tend the environment, and wondered what your thoughts were on that formulation of the words.
Thanks, Luke. It's true, the way that the right to a healthy environment, I used the right to a healthy environment as kind of shorthand, but when I did research on this for my PhD a few years ago, the right is described in different ways in many different countries. So we have some countries that say the right to a favorable environment, the right to an environment that is conducive to human health and development, the right to an environment that is ecologically balanced. I think that when you talk about tending, we're talking really about the responsibility that we also have which is to protect the environment through our actions. And I think that's actually a really important point that doesn't get enough attention, that while we have a right to live in a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, we also have responsibilities to protect a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Individuals have that responsibility, businesses have that responsibility, and states have obligations to put in place legal frameworks that enable us to fulfill that responsibility, which currently can be very challenging. So I'm not sure, I haven't seen any legislation or constitutions around the world that use the language of tending, but I can tell you that there are over 80 constitutions that do say very clearly that individuals have a responsibility to protect the healthy environment as well.
Thank you, David. And one of our workshops today was actually on how we advance the rights of nature as a complement to our right to a healthy environment as well. And that's something that ERCS will be doing more work on in the coming year.
Well, Shivali, that's really interesting. Let me jump in on that, because one of the most exciting developments in this field, led by Latin America, is what I describe as an ecocentric interpretation of the human right to a healthy environment. And so in 2017, the Inter-American Court on Human Rights published what they call an advisory opinion on human rights and the environment. And when they described the right to a healthy environment, they said that it's a unique right because it protects not only the health of humans, but the health of ecosystems, including rivers, oceans, forests, etc. And that 2017 advisory opinion of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights has been very influential in the region. So we now have decisions from the Supreme Court of Mexico, the Constitutional Court of Colombia, the Supreme Court of Costa Rica, which are talking about the right to a healthy environment as having two aspects, kind of an anthropocentric aspect, which protects humans, and also an ecocentric aspect, which protects non-human nature. And I think these court decisions are really fascinating because they recognize that humans are actually part of nature. You know, we've for centuries in the West, we've kind of separated humans and nature, but these ecocentric interpretations of the human right to a healthy environment recognize that we are part of natural systems, and both humans and nature need to be protected.
I'll come back to you on that, David. I'll follow up with an email. That would be really good. Thank you.
Of course.
Do we have any more questions from the audience? Yes, over there. Can you stand up and say your name as well? Is it Margaret? Yeah, lovely.
From Sustainable Strathclyde. In today's Glasgow Herald, there is a letter from a resident of Glasgow saying that there was a park in his area, a deprived area, which had been allowed to deteriorate, and the council have recently brought the park back into the way it should be, with flowers and plants and play areas and grass and greenery. But over the last weekend, the park has been practically destroyed. People have left all their litter, and the resident who wrote the letter said, what can we do? The people don't understand that they are connected to nature. What can we do to change the culture so that people understand that nature is part of them and they are part of nature? Does it all have to come down to the teachers?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. And I think that actually connects back to the general comment 26 that was mentioned earlier by Shivali, which was produced just in August, published in August by the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. Every child has the right to an education, and that right to education specifically includes the right to environmental education. And I think this is just absolutely critically important, that we supply teachers and school systems with the tools necessary so that every child understands that they are part of nature, understands that they have a right to a healthy environment, and understands that they have a responsibility to protect that environment. That's something that I think we should be teaching not only every child, but should be part of the curriculum from kindergarten with the wee ones right up to university. So even every university student, whether you're taking finance, engineering, whatever you're taking at university, you should also have to take a course on basic sustainability principles so that we create citizens who are informed and who aren't going to, take that kind of environmentally disrespectful and destructive type of behavior.
I'm going to give you one more question, and I'm going to let you go, because I think it's just past 6 a.m. in Canada, isn't it?
I'm in no rush. I'll just be having breakfast after this, so please carry on.
Well, I'll give you one question from Lloyd Austin, and then if you're able to listen to the Scottish Government's Human Rights Bill team, who will explain a little bit more about the wider bill framework, that would be great. But question from Lloyd first.
Thanks, Shirley. Hi, David. My question relates to the Scottish Government's Human Rights Bill, which we're going to hear more about later. Obviously, as ERCS, we're delighted that the proposal is still there and that the human right to a healthy environment forms part of it. But the real key test will be how effective it is, how enforceable it is. So from your experience around the world, I wonder if you could give us a few examples of the processes or the mechanisms that we could ask for to make sure that the human right to a healthy environment is not just words on a paper, but actually something that we can use and becomes effective.
Yeah, that's a super question, Lloyd, and something that obviously I've thought long and hard about. Some of the things that I mentioned earlier are really critical. Ensuring that people have a right of access to justice and effective remedies, making sure there are, policies in place to ensure that that access to justice is affordable, accessible, and timely. Having alternative dispute resolution mechanisms is another important thing. So, going to court can be an expensive and time-consuming process. So sometimes mediation can be helpful. To have a specialized environmental court is something that's been effective in many countries around the world, ranging from India to Argentina to Kenya, because you have judges there who are trained in the environment, and often that's a barrier in countries where judges know nothing about the environment. I would also say that it's really important to build the legal community, build what we call the legal support infrastructure, so that you have organizations like the Environmental Rights Centre for Scotland that can provide citizens with advice on what their rights are, what their potential remedies are, and that's also an important piece of the puzzle. I think in many ways, I can kind of compare Scotland to the province of Quebec in Canada. Quebec was the first Canadian jurisdiction to recognize the right to a healthy environment, which they did in 1978 through their environmental legislation, but it wasn't enforceable. And so that right kind of languished. It didn't have much of an impact. But in 2006, Quebec became the first Canadian jurisdiction to put the right to a healthy environment into their human rights legislation. And that has been really a transformative change. It has empowered the people of Quebec, and it has propelled Quebec into a position of leadership in Canada in terms of environmental policy and environmental performance. So I think that's kind of similar to the situation. Both Quebec and Scotland have similar sized populations. Both have attempted to separate from their current countries, but also the inclusion of the right to a healthy environment in the Scottish Human Rights Bill really will be, in terms of Commonwealth countries, it will be one of the most progressive developments. And so making sure that it is enforceable is critically important. A lot of common law countries up to this time have a very narrow and restrictive approach to what is called standing, which is kind of the first step to get you into the courtroom. Common law countries require people to demonstrate a direct impact on themselves, whether that's physical or economic. But of course, in many cases, when we're talking about the environment, you can't prove that direct impact. If you're concerned about air pollution, it's really very, very difficult scientifically to prove, even if you have respiratory or cardiovascular problems, to prove that your illness was caused by air pollution is a scientifically almost impossible task. Similarly, you may be concerned about the health of an ecosystem or whether that's on land or in fresh water or in the ocean. You can't really show a direct impact on yourself. But the right to a healthy environment should be used to open that courtroom door. It should be used to say, look, I have this recognized legal right to a healthy environment that enables me to bring forward concerns about the government's failure to respect, protect, and fulfill that right. So I would say that's one of the most important things that has to be present in the Scottish Human Rights Bill if it's going to be truly effective, is for it to be easily enforceable. And of course, the legal system has all kinds of mechanisms to prevent frivolous and vexatious lawsuits. Litigation, as I said, is expensive and time consuming. And the last thing I'll say that's really an important point and a new argument is that governments around the world, when we were working on these United Nations resolutions, their biggest fear was that they would be subject to a deluge of lawsuits from environmentalists and concerned citizens. The fact is there are already quite a few lawsuits because many governments are not living up to their human rights obligations when it comes to the environment. But what's been happening in recent years, a very new and interesting and kind of promising development from the government's perspective, is that governments have been able to use the right to a healthy environment as a shield. When they bring in stronger laws and policies to protect the environment or to address climate change, they are now being sued by businesses, by industry associations who are saying, wait a minute, you're interfering with our corporate rights, our property rights, our rights to make and maximize profits. And governments have been able to say, well, listen, the actions we have been taking, for example, to prohibit the use of single-use plastics, those actions are mandated by our obligation to protect our people's right to a healthy environment. And courts have accepted that argument in cases all over the world. So this is really quite exciting that the right to a healthy environment, rather than being something government should be afraid of, is something government should be keenly interested in, because in the midst of a global environmental crisis, when we need stronger climate laws, we need stronger environmental laws, there will be challenges from industry. That I can absolutely guarantee. And governments being able to fight back against those challenges using the right to a healthy environment as a shield is a very powerful development.
Brilliant. It's so reassuring to know that ERCS is on the right track. I think it's really reassuring for everybody in the room to hear the endorsement and the specialism and the professionalism and the academic knowledge that you bring to this. So thank you. And if you haven't already been persuaded about why the right to a healthy environment is so important to be incorporated in the new Scottish Human Rights Bill, why we need you all to respond to the consultation and respond to Part 5, use our online template, which I hope will give you guidance on what we need to see strengthened in the consultation.